Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I would like to welcome you to episode 92 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. In this episode, I interview Matt Kelly, editor of Compliance Week, who talks about two upcoming events, Compliance Week Europe and Compliance Week West. He also comments on his take on the ongoing NFL problems regarding discipline, Ray Rice and Adrian Peterson.
Hello,
I hope you
everyone.
enjoy the
This is
episode.
Tom Fox, and I would like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today it is my distinct pleasure to have my good friend and colleague, Matt Kelly. Matt is the editor of Compliance Week. He's certainly a good friend, and I can say he's a colleague now, or maybe even my boss, because I'm a contributing editor at Compliance Week, so I get to work with him on a professional basis as well. Matt, hello, and thanks a lot for agreeing to coming on the podcast.
Hello, Tom. It's my pleasure to be here.
Matt, you and I were together last week at the SCCE Compliance Annual 2014 Compliance and Ethics Institute, and we had a chance to visit, and you shared with me some of the exciting things that are coming up around Compliance Week and some of the events it's going to put on. I understand you have two conferences coming up, the first being Compliance Week Europe and the second, Compliance Week West. Could you tell us about both of those?
Yeah, sure. I will start with Compliance Week Europe, since that one is coming up first. That is the European version of the big annual conference we have in the United States. Here in the U.S., we've done that for about 10 years or so. We do it every spring. Compliance Week Europe is the European version of that, and it is happening October 13 and 14 in Brussels, where we cover a lot of the same sort of subjects as we might here in the United States. We cover a lot of anti-corruption, a lot of how you would structure an ethics and compliance program, a lot about dealing with regulators, although obviously we do it with a much more European focus and European audience members and speakers. So we do have somewhat of a different feel for the agenda for Europe. For example, there is a lot more focus on privacy compliance, which is a much bigger and more complicated issue in Europe than it is in the United States. We have a variety of subjects on the agenda in Europe looking at anti-corruption separate from the FCPA. That is still a very big deal for even European companies if they are working with Americans or listed in the United States. But for a fair number of European companies, they are more concerned with the UK Bribery Act or other anti-corruption laws coming out of the European Union. And we do a lot more about how you work with emerging markets in the European Conference, since a lot of European compliance executives oversee the Middle East and North Africa and even sub-Saharan Africa quite a bit more. So their emerging markets are really sometimes their direct responsibility. So there's issues like that. Compliance Week West is happening next. That would happen in November. It's on Tuesday, November 18, out in San Francisco. That's really going to be a one-day event that is a deep dive looking at the COSO framework. Now, for your listeners who are more on the legal side of compliance departments who are wondering what COSO is, they could talk to their audit or pure compliance counterparts who would tell you that the COSO framework is really driven by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and how you apply the COSO framework for effective internal control over financial reporting. The COSO framework underwent a dramatic overhaul last year that most companies are now putting into place this year. It was a big struggle, and we're looking at how you do implement the new COSO framework, foremost for good control over your corporate accounting, but a lot of COSO is also about how you can better manage your enterprise risks generally. That could include anti-corruption. And certainly if you have a big bribery scandal going on that your legal team is investigating, odds are you don't have the bribery scandal unless you also have bad accounting. So that's where a COSO framework can also enter into play. But those are the two big events, Europe in Brussels next month in October, and then Compliance Week West in San Francisco in November.
Matt, if I could focus a little bit on Compliance Week West and specifically on COSO.
Sure.
Within the past sort of month or so, I've had an aha moment myself around COSO. It came from the Smith & Wesson FCPA enforcement where it was the first time I think we had seen a FCPA enforcement action based solely on the lack of internal controls. And my aha moment was, as a lawyer, I'd really never paid attention to COSO, the COSO framework before, thinking that was just an auditing standard. But the Securities and Exchange Commission has made it patently clear that they will look at your FCPA compliance program in the context of the COSO mandated framework for internal controls. Is that correct?
Generally, yes, it is, and I agree that the Smith & Wesson case is a interesting and newsworthy development on the intersection of COSO and FCPA enforcement. But again, when you think about it, you really cannot have a big bribery operation in your company unless your internal controls over corporate accounting somehow didn't catch that. So almost by definition, if you have a big FCPA problem, your COSO controls somewhere are going to be weak. As I said, once upon a time, the original COSO framework was developed in 1992, and the SEC first started using it for Sarbanes-Oxley compliance matters around 2004. Well, that was already a 12-year-old framework, and now it would be 22 years old. So several years ago, the COSO people, and COSO, by the way, stands for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, which was a holdover from the 1980s and various other corporate scandals. The COSO committee knew they needed to overhaul their framework for effective internal control. And they did that in the early part of the 2010s, and they finally finished their new framework in 2013 to go into effect with any financial reporting statements filed after December 15th of this year. If you are still using the old framework after that, your audit firm would note that at the very least, and they probably would be saying you don't have effective internal control over financial reporting. It is worth remembering for all of the legal officers who might be listening here that, bribery is about pulling some quick actions and quick stunts past the accounting department. So COSO is the standard for having good, strong accounting, and it's well worth paying attention to. It's well worth knowing what it is. The finance officers, the corporate accounting office, they can spend their lifetimes eating and breathing COSO, but even legal officers should know what COSO is and how failures there are probably going to wind up spilling onto your desk sooner or later in an enforcement matter.
And Matt, to tie that into FCPA enforcement actions we've seen over the past few years, my observation has been that to get the pot of money to fund briberies, there's generally three schemes. One is that you overcharge the customer, the customer then pays the money back, and then the spread, the difference, is paid as a bribe or a kickback to the purchasing officer. But the second and third frameworks or mechanisms are basically employees defrauding a company, and instead of keeping the proceeds of that fraud, they're using that pot of money or using that money to create a pot to pay a bribe. So, for instance, we saw that in the HP case in a scheme where HP stuffed the channel by selling hardware right at the end of a quarter, and then at the beginning of a new quarter, the distributor it was sold to would resell it, and then HP would buy it back at a premium. We also saw, we've seen money embezzled through gifts, travel, and entertainment, and that was in the Lilly enforcement action and in the GSK action as well. So the importance that I've come to realize about internal controls is, yes, they're good financial controls, but they're also almost mandatory to be a part of an anti-corruption compliance program so that a company is not defrauded by its own employees who can then create a pot of money to pay a bribe.
I would even zero in on the travel and entertainment example you just mentioned there, because so often that is where a bribe hides, or it is a bribe that exists by other names. It may not be a cash transaction per se, but let's say you have poor internal control over the T&E account, and an employee then treats a government official or a big customer to come to stay at the local hotel and visit the local plant, and you wind up putting them in the presidential suite at the Four Seasons for $8,000 a night. That's a bribe. That's kissing up to somebody to win business for them. And if you had strong, effective internal control over your travel account, that might look something like no employee can spend more than $500 for any hotel reservation without a supervisor, or no employee can reserve the presidential suite, period. And audit firms, when they are auditing clients, will look at that level of granularity around the T&E account. It is rife with potential for abuse. So it's those sort of controls there that could prevent the employee from ever, having an easy time giving a bribe or doing a favor to some foreign official in the first place. And you could riff off of that example of the Four Seasons in any number of ways, but that's how good, effective internal control would help the anti-corruption officer doing his job.
Well, Matt, I really think your Compliance Week West is going to be a revelation of many legal service compliance officers. So if you're listening to this, I would urge you to go to the Compliance Week website and register for Compliance Week West if you're in that part of the country. It's being held at the Union Square Marriott, which is a fabulous venue. If you've ever stayed there, I have. It's a great venue. So I'm really looking forward to what those presentations may be and how it applies to the anti-corruption world. If I could turn now back to Compliance Week Europe, and what I'd like to ask you is, you have a pretty prestigious advisory board listed that you used to help you develop the agenda. The people are from a wide variety of industries, telecom, food, retail, food, commercial, more large commercial, those types of groups. So can you tell us how the advisory board worked with you and your staff to put together the agenda?
Well, a lot of times we will circulate some sort of questionnaire to the advisory board, usually very simple, but giving them a few different ideas of what we think the agenda should be about. And at the very basic level, it isn't terribly rocket science. Obviously, you need something around, say, privacy. You would need something around how compliance officers work with their boards, or how you might manage internal investigations. But I don't know exactly how to put a European spin on it. So then we would get some written feedback from the advisory board. We would use that to come up with some more specific ideas. How might you actually do a build a privacy compliance program that straddles U.S. and European requirements, which are quite different? How might you do an investigation when so many European countries have very strict employee protections on what you can ask them? They help us with that level of granularity. And then we do a few conference calls with the advisory board. They give us some extra feedback. They're also very good for helping us understand who might be good speakers, and a lot of them wind up speaking on our European conference. They are a very, very crucial part of how we put this all together. We're always aware at Compliance Week of looking like the Americans who blunder into a foreign market, thinking we understand what we're doing, and the foreign market looks at us saying, you look like an American blundering into a foreign market. We are not here to make ourselves look good. We are going there to help Europeans build effective compliance programs. However they tell me they need to do it, that's what I do. They're the experts. So really, they're an invaluable part of the process.
In addition to focusing on the privacy and perhaps cybersecurity as well, the privacy is certainly on the front lines of many Europeans. You also touched on another subject that I think is important for the compliance practitioner in that part of the world, which is a not Europe focus, but a region focus. Mm-hmm. And that means Europe. That means the Middle East. That means Africa. And so many of the challenges in regions or areas outside the United States or Western Europe can be different or daunting. And it appears that you're going to have some panelists and speakers speak directly to what at Halliburton we called it the MENA region, Middle East, Europe, and Africa.
Yep.
But it's a lot more than simply Compliance Week Europe, it's Compliance Week in the Eastern Hemisphere.
Well, when you think about it, in the United States, the vast majority of economic activity most businesses have is with other businesses or customers in the United States. Our actual exposure to foreign markets compared to our domestic market isn't that big. That is not the case in Europe. In almost every single European country, they do a much larger portion of business with other countries than we do. So it's always at the forefront of their mind is how do I deal with, dealing with the Middle East, certainly, because they depend on the Middle East to be a valuable source of new consumer markets. They certainly use the Middle East for their energy markets back and forth. They are geographically so much closer to North Africa and the Middle East. The other big thing that I think is worth noting is that the European market is so much more directly exposed to the political instability that is sweeping around Europe. It's not in Europe, but certainly every European executive I talk to worries about, number one, Ukraine, and number two, Turkey, who are huge trading partners for the European Union, and they're beset with instability, economic instability and political instability. That United States executives, I don't think we quite grasp it, as if we were, imagine the United States with Canada and Mexico both swept up in all sorts of instability that you see in Turkey and in the Ukraine. We would be hiding under our desks if we had to live through that reality. The European executives do. And still, they also can't avoid it because, as I said, they're so much smaller and therefore needing to go into other countries to do more business and survive, that they're lashed to these very unstable areas. And it's probably the single biggest difference between Europe and the North American market that I can think of.
It's an important difference. I appreciate you bringing that up because you're right. It's something that we do not face. It's not a topic of conversation in the water cooler or probably in compliance meeting rooms across the country here in the United States. So very, very well put. Matt, if I could turn now to a completely different subject, and it was something that was certainly on our minds last week, on the minds of people at the SCCE, and probably on the minds of a lot of people in the United States, and you wrote about it appropriately because it was on a lot of people's minds, and that is the NFL, Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson,
yes,
and sort of their ongoing non-response to a series of lapses in their compliance and or other regimes. So I'd like to just get your take. Where did they go wrong, and what can they do to rectify it?
Well, I find it fascinating because I won't say that the Ray Rice scandal brings out the worst in corporate behavior, but it brings out all of the things that corporate America doesn't really like to talk about. As I had mentioned in my column, I think that first off, what Ray Rice did, punching his wife, is, socially it's totally unacceptable. Legally it is against the law. But what he did is the smaller part of the problem, and it's the easier one to handle. And it's worth noting that once this scandal and once the video of him hitting his wife blew up on the Internet, the NFL actually had no problem issuing out very swift discipline against him. They cut him loose immediately. The problem is that he did this misconduct back in April or March and was lightly suspended in July, and if this video had not come out and put the NFL on the spot, they would not really have ever taken that stern discipline against him. His action never changed between April and August. The severity of it and its repulsiveness didn't change between April and August. It's merely that the NFL acted in its own strategic priorities and let those priorities trump good common sense and good ethics. The ethical thing to do would be not to work with somebody who abuses his wife and is, in my mind, committing felony assault. That's what it looks like on that video to me. However, the NFL's strategic priority is to make as much money for the NFL as possible. If you can do that by covering up Ray Rice, then you cover it up. If you can do that by cutting loose Ray Rice, then you cut him loose. And it's that sort of back and forth that looks so cynical that really was a big turnoff for me. But it did get to, I think, the bigger issue is that the NFL's strategic priorities trampled its ethical culture. You can see that with Ray Rice. You could see it with any number of other domestic abuse problems that have happened there. Already, we had the Minnesota Vikings player who disciplined his 4-year-old son with a switch. He's now even the latest contemporary domestic abuse face for the NFL. I'm sure that there will be more. And the NFL really needs to send a message that we put good ethics ahead of maximizing our profit. It's a nice thing to say, and a lot of companies say it. It's not easy to do, and the NFL didn't do it. I think that there are probably other companies that would also do the same. I think that they would always be looking for how do we maximize profit at the expense of other good ethics. A lot of people would say that General Motors did the same sort of thing when it turned a blind eye to its ignition problems with its Chevy Volt. And how do you break that sort of a mindset? How do you clearly show that ethics takes all costs? That's difficult to do, and a lot of companies have a history of not doing it. And the NFL is just the very visual, very gripping latest example of that.
You turned a great phrase in that column that I'm going to certainly use as lesson learned and teaching moments going forward. You called it the difference between core values and core priorities.
Yes.
And that for me really put it together in one sentence. Are your priorities aligned with your values? And then you went on to say values are easy, but it's the priorities where you have to work.
Absolutely. I'll give credit where credit is due. So I stole that phrase from a book called Decisive by the Heath brothers. And they pointed out that you might have a great core value of honesty. Well, what does that mean? If you're running a hot dog stand and I sell you the hot dog, Tom, and you immediately drop it by accident right in front of me, I could honestly tell you, buyer beware, you dropped it, that's your problem. It'll be another $2 for a hot dog. Or my priority might be to win over loyal customers and say, no problem, here's a replacement at no charge. In either case, I'm being honest, but you're getting radically different ethics impressions based on what my priorities are. Are they to make as much money for myself or to do the right thing by the customer? That's a nice, simple way to think of ethical priorities versus ethics statements. And I think a lot of companies would struggle with that, and I would recommend that book. It's by the Heath brothers called Decisive. I would recommend that to any compliance officer. It helps frame up a lot of these issues very nicely.
Matt, we're near the end of our time. I would like to trumpet and triumph the new Compliance Week website look. You've completely, it looks like to me, completely redone it. It's very dynamic, much user-friendlier, if that's the right way, with some color pictures and nice snapshots of you and your contributing writers and authors. Are there any other sort of new or exciting events going on in the Compliance Week world that you could tell us about?
Well, I would just make one quick note about our new website, and thank you for the praise there. We put a lot of work into it. If you are a subscriber to Compliance Week, or more specifically, if your company is a subscriber to Compliance Week, one of the nice new features we have is that if you see something interesting, you can pin it to your own virtual filing cabinet and then share that with other Compliance Week subscribers from your company. So that certainly is a nice way to keep your team informed of interesting things you see. We also are just now starting to plan our 2015 annual conference. We have the registration page open for that. We don't actually have much content yet since it is still 9 months away, I believe. That will be our 10th anniversary conference, and it will be next May 18 through 20 in Washington, D.C., and it will be at the Mayflower Hotel as usual. You'll be hearing more about that in coming months, but we're just starting to plan that out now. And other than that, that we continue to be as lively and informative as we can. So that's what we're doing down here.
I would encourage anyone listening, if they're interested in speaking at Compliance Week or has an idea for a session or panel. Last week we heard a very unique one from one of the a woman who works at a company that subscribes to Compliance Week, and Matt shared that idea with us. So I know he's open to a wide variety of topics and interests and presented in a unique, new, or different way. And that certainly was one of the ideas presented last week. So if you'd like to speak at Compliance Week, it is a fabulous conference. It's a wonderful opportunity to meet many of your peers across the country. It's at a great venue, and it's the week before Memorial Day, so it's before the tourist season. So with that, Matt, once again, I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's been a great chance to visit with you, and look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom.